Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I did not sleep much the night before we took the Cherokee up for real. I lay on the cot in the tower break room, listening to the wind press against the tarps and the faint ticks of cooling metal in the consoles, replaying every step in my head. Magneto timing, fuel strainers, battery leads, the way the engine had finally caught and smoothed out, the way Noah's face hadn't changed when it did, except for a small tightening around his eyes that only someone watching closely would have seen. It reminded me too much of the last time I'd watched an aircraft leave this airport. Back then, it had been a C-130 lumbering down runway 9R with the last evacuees aboard, turboprops dragging a column of noise across the Delaware. Back then, I'd still been ground in the headset, reading back clearances and taxi instructions as if the world outside the glass was not coming apart. Now, instead of a 4-engine transport, we had a single-engine Piper Cherokee with a freshly coaxed heart and a lot riding on whether we had done our work correctly. By the time the first gray light of dawn reached the horizon, I had gone through the checklist in my head so many times that I knew I would mess it up if I tried to rely on memory. That was the entire point of having written it down in big block letters on the piece of cardboard the night before. I got up, swung my feet onto the cold floor, and felt the stiffness in my legs from the previous day's work on the ramp. Outside, the city was a dark shape with only a few hints of color at its edges. The river was just a darker strip cutting across the east. Noah was already awake, sitting at the supervisor's desk with the handheld radio in front of him, flipping through his notebook. He looked up when he heard my boots. "Morning," he said. His voice was low but steady. "How'd you sleep?" I asked. "Enough to not be stupid," he said. "You?" "Somewhere between enough and just barely," I said. "I'll take the coffee that doesn't exist and a glass of water instead." We drank water and ate a dry snack bar each, something with more calories than taste. You don't want a full stomach before you go flying in a situation where everything is already on edge, but you also do not want to be running on fumes. I checked the notepad with our plan again. It wasn't complicated, but flying never is as simple as the line you draw on the map. Step 1, confirm weather. Step 2, confirm nobody on the field had decided overnight to make our departure path more interesting than we needed it to be. Step 3, drive to Lansdowne, pre-flight the Cherokee with the same thoroughness as yesterday. Step 4, short field takeoff from the grass strip, climb out, stay low enough to minimize time in uncontrolled air we could not monitor properly, high enough to have options if the engine faltered. Step 5, ferry flight back to Philadelphia, landing on the grass area inside the airport grounds we had walked the week before. Step 6, get the airplane tied down where we wanted it before anything moved in from the perimeter. After that, we would see. We went downstairs together, moving down the stairwell landings one at a time, listening as we always did for anything that would make us halt. The building breathed around us, just expansion and contraction of concrete and steel. No other sounds. The deadbolt on the ground door came back under my hand with the same familiar resistance. I cracked it, looked out, then opened it fully. The air outside had that washed, clean feel it gets after a cool night. Visibility was good. Low, scattered clouds toward the city, but nothing that would touch our altitude. Wind was light from the southwest, which suited our planned departure path just fine. The F-250 waited in its spot like it had never moved. I still checked inside before I opened the driver door. Rules are rules because they work, not because you remember them. The cab was empty, the gear where we had left it. I turned the key and the diesel came up with its usual low rumble. On the way out through the perimeter gate, we both looked up at the tower. It looked small from the ground, just another structure among many. Hard to believe that everything in our world was organized around what happened inside that glass crown. "Last chance to call this a bad idea," I said lightly, as we rolled onto the access road. "It's a bad idea," Noah said. "We're still doing it." We cut through the same streets we had used the day before, past the same crashed delivery truck V-shaped in the road, past the same grocery with the boarded windows. Nothing new in the way of debris, nothing new in the way of movement. The neighborhood near Lansdowne Airstrip had the same quiet, heavy feel. It was still eerie to see front porches with wind chimes that occasionally knocked gently together in the breeze, like someone had just stepped inside for a moment and forgotten to come back. We parked the truck 1 block over from the fence to avoid putting a large white rectangle in direct view of the strip, and then went the rest of the way on foot. The grass strip looked the way we had left it, dew shining on the blades. The track of the Cherokee's rollout still visible as a faint change in color and compression. No new holes opened, no fresh tire tracks, no signs of visitors. Inside the hangar, the air smelled faintly of fuel, metal, and the ghost of cold mornings. The Cherokee sat where we had towed it, paint scuffed but intact, cowl latched, tie-down secure. We started the pre-flight the way we always did, even though everything in us wanted to get it over with and go. Fuel, visually checked, not just trusting the gauges. We popped the caps, checked levels with a dipstick, confirmed the fuel still looked like fuel. No discoloration, no water bubbles. Drained a little from the sumps in the strainer into a clear jar. No sediment. Oil, level where it should be. No streaks suggesting leaks overnight. Filler cap tight. Control surfaces. Ailerons, elevator, rudder all moved freely. Hinges intact, no cracked hardware, all cotter pins in place. Cables snug. Tires, still firm, no new cracks or bulges, no debris lodged in the treads. Engine compartment. We opened the cowl again, checked that nothing had worked itself loose since yesterday, traced fuel lines and ignition cables with eyes and fingers, verified our timing marks were where we had left them. The battery we'd brought was still on its cart. Leads were tight, corrosion brushed off. Inside the cockpit, Noah did the interior checks. Circuit breakers in. Controls free and correct. Trim set to takeoff. Flaps up for now. Mixture and throttle full forward, then back to idle to be sure nothing stuck. Fuel selector on the fuller tank. Master off. We looked at each other and ran through the emergency options one more time. The part most people skim past in their heads when they fly from a comfortable airport in a world that still makes sense. If the engine quits on the roll before we hit abort speed, we throttle idle, brakes, mixture cut, mags off, I recited. If it quits after we're airborne and before we have altitude, I lower the nose, aim for the open strip ahead, he said. No turning back. Mixture idle cut off, fuel off, mags off, master off. We slide it straight. If you have altitude, you pick a field, not a street, I said. We don't try to clear houses if we can't guarantee it. He nodded. We keep this conservative, or we don't do it. We pushed the Cherokee out of the hangar by hand to the same starting point as yesterday. Nose pointed down the grass strip where we'd walked and looked for holes. The air was almost completely calm, with only the lightest breath of wind from our right. Acceptable. I stepped off to the side at our agreed vantage point, where I could see the first half of the run and wave him off if something looked wrong. He strapped in, went through the interior checklist one more time, then looked toward me. I raised my right hand, fingers spread, ready when you are. He keyed the master on. Set mixture rich, cracked the throttle, checked fuel pump, then thumbed the starter. The engine caught faster than it had yesterday. It settled into a smooth idle that sounded almost normal. I heard him do the run-up, watching for the tail to dip as he leaned into the brakes. He tested the magnetos, watched the RPM change. Everything looked and sounded within reason. He turned the airplane into position, aligned as best as he could with our mental center line, and paused. I could almost feel him taking a breath through the distance between us. Then the Cherokee began to roll. From the side, the acceleration looked modest at first, then more assertive as the prop bit into thicker air near the ground. Grass kicked up behind the main wheels. The tail came up. I watched the posture of the airplane the way you watch a person's body language, looking for any sign of drag, any sign of something binding. He didn't yank on the yoke. He waited, let the airplane build enough speed, then eased it up with a small, deliberate pull. The mains left the ground. The gap between tires and grass grew. The airplane stayed low for a few seconds, gathering speed and ground effect, then began a shallow, positive climb. I watched until he cleared the far tree line, nose still slightly below what some pilots would choose. Less angle, more speed. That was exactly what I wanted to see. I jogged back to the truck, keeping an eye on the Cherokee as it climbed to pattern altitude. He turned crosswind, then downwind toward the general direction of the airport. It felt strange watching an airplane leave without a frequency change, without a call to tower, without any of the usual choreography. We would handle that part ourselves. On the handheld clipped to my vest, I kept monitor on guard and on our old tower frequency. They were quiet, which didn't surprise me. I keyed up anyway. Cherokee 312 Bravo, Philadelphia Tower, I said, using the tail number we'd loosely assigned. Radio check. Tower 312 Bravo, reading you 5x5. Noah's voice came back, steady and clear. Climbing through 1,000 feet, southbound smooth air. Copy, I said. Advise when you have the field in sight. No known traffic. Surface wind calm. Use caution for wildlife on and near the runways. It felt good to say the words again, even if it was just me and him. I drove the F-250 back using the same route we always used, but this time the sky had a piece of us in it. I kept one eye on the road and one eye on the small shape of the Cherokee moving across the morning air like it belonged there. By the time I reached the airport perimeter road, he was already in a left-hand pattern over the field at about 1,000 feet above the ground, wings gently banking as he circled and looked. From the tower, the view would have been familiar. From his cockpit, it was probably something else entirely. I parked the truck by the base of the tower, locked it, and went inside. Climbing 6 flights of stairs after a morning like that is a different kind of workout than any gym. My legs complained. My lungs were steady. Adrenaline helped. At the top, I went straight to the glass and scanned for some. The Cherokee appeared out of the southeast, wings level, descending slightly, crossing the field in a wide observational pass. On the radio, Noah's voice came again. Tower 312 Bravo, field in sight, making one orbit for visual recon. 312 Bravo, Tower. Cleared for the overhead. Report when ready to turn final for landing on the grass strip north of runway 27 right, I answered. Habit made the clearances sound official even though the runways were technically closed to the world. Wilco, he said. I watched his orbit, noting how his eyes must be moving. Over the terminal roofs, across the cargo ramps, down the runways, over the river, up toward the city, out to the refineries. From the tower, I watched him watching. It was the closest thing we had now to a radar picture. When he finally turned in for a landing on the grass area we had scouted near one of the closed taxiways, everything happened in a controlled sequence. Descent, flaps, alignment, flare. The airplane kissed down on the grass and rolled out straight. No drama, no bounce. He let it slow naturally, then turned carefully toward the taxiway we'd marked in our heads as safest. We'd made it. You would think the moment of touchdown would be the most intense part. It wasn't. It was the tow across the open field back to the maintenance hangar we'd chosen as the Cherokee's new home. I drove the truck out as soon as he shut down and gave me the thumbs up. We hooked the tow strap to the airplane's nose gear in the method he'd shown me, the one that would pull without overstressing it. I took it slow as I could without bogging down in soft patches. The airport felt different with a small airplane in tow behind a truck that had once moved runway inspection crews. It felt like the past, and whatever our future was going to be, had rubbed against each other for the first time in months. We got the Cherokee inside, shocked the wheels, and closed the hangar doors. The moment they latched, the outside world went from exposure to a muffled background again. Only then did the tension in my shoulders let go a little. "You realize what this changes," Noah said, leaning against the cowl. "Yeah," I said. "We just added another dimension to our world." He exhaled. "We've got eyes above the streets now. That means better decisions. It also means more ways to get in trouble. We'll stick to the first one as long as we can," I said. We walked the airplane one more time, hands on metal, as if reassuring both it and ourselves. I checked the fuel level so I'd have a rough idea of what the short flight had cost us. It matched what I remembered from my basic performance charts, a few gallons. The engine had felt healthy from his description. Stable RPM, no surging, good response to throttle. Back in the tower, we added the flight to the notebook. Time off, time on, route, altitudes, engine behavior, any anomalies, none. We underlined the successful start and landing because in a place like this, you mark the wins. For the rest of the morning, we stayed on the ground. It would have been easy to get carried away with the success and immediately start planning longer flights, wider loops. That would have been a mistake. Airplanes are like any tool. You test them, trust them slowly, and remember that all the physics in the world do not care how much you want something to work. Instead, we made a more modest plan for the afternoon. A short reconnaissance loop west of the airport at a few thousand feet, just enough to see how the neighborhoods looked from above and to check a stretch of the river where we knew Lena sometimes took the barge. The idea was simple. Get a sense of what lay between us and the port of Wilmington, and locate any obvious hazards, smoke columns, clusters of vehicles, patterns of movement that suggested large groups of infected or survivors. The afternoon air was warmer and a little bumpier, but still manageable. I flew this time. It felt strange to sit in the left seat of a small airplane again after so long. My hands knew where to go before my conscious brain thought about it. Throttle, mixture, primer, master. I followed the same checklist we had used before, reading it out loud, letting the cadence settle my nerves. When the engine started for me as easily as it had for Noah, a small part of my worry dialed down. We taxied to the same grass strip. I kept my feet light on the rudder pedals, working around the unevenness of the ground. Noah watched outside like a second set of eyes, calling anything he saw that I might miss. The takeoff roll was short. The Cherokee was lighter with the fuel load we'd chosen and fewer tools aboard. I rotated at a speed I trusted and climbed toward the west, keeping my turn gradual and my eyes scanning the airspace. At 1,000 feet above the ground, the city spread out under us like a frozen map. From up there, the damage looked both more and less than what I'd imagined. There were whole blocks that appeared almost untouched, roofs intact, cars still in driveways, streets unscarred. There were other blocks where fire had clearly chewed through structures, leaving only blackened rectangles and collapsed roofs. Parking lots were full of vehicles that would probably never move again. Interstates were still jammed in places, rows of cars angled and twisted, like someone had hit pause during the worst traffic jam in history. I kept the airplane in a loose racetrack pattern, giving myself room to turn in options if anything in the engine sound changed. We stayed below the levels where pressurized airliners used to fly, and above the heights that small arms fire from the ground would reliably reach. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a compromise. On the radio, I kept up a steady, calm commentary, half for NOAA and half for any aircraft that might be monitoring. 312 Bravo, Abeam, University City. 2,000 feet, smooth ride, I said. Numerous abandoned vehicles on the expressways, no obvious smoke columns at this time. Philadelphia Tower, we are in a westbound loop, will remain within 10 miles of the field. 312 Bravo Tower, radar service terminated, NOAA said, playing along with the old script. Report any significant movement or hazards, no known traffic. I smiled despite myself. It felt good to do it. It also kept us disciplined. As we turned south toward the river, the Delaware came into view, broad and slow. From up here, you could see the way the channel curved around islands and piers. The big container cranes at the port of Philadelphia stood like frozen sentries. The water itself looked calm, but you could see the subtle color changes where currents met. Farther south, toward Tinicum and Essington, we picked up the bend where we'd helped Lena with the barge. The little work platform wasn't there now. The spot where she'd grounded was empty, water swirling around the shoal. That was good. It meant she'd stayed in motion. "Anything?" I asked over the intercom. "Negative," NOAA said, scanning with his handheld binoculars pressed up to the side window. "No barge on the bend, no smoke from that direction. There's some activity near one of the marinas, but I can't tell if that's people or just flags moving." We made one more loop along the river, this time a little lower, then turned back inland. The suburbs from above looked like a board game that someone had stopped playing. Pools with still dark surfaces, baseball fields with weed-sprouting infields, school parking lots empty. I kept each leg of the pattern short. The point of this flight was not to sightsee. It was to get enough of a picture that we could plan with more confidence, and then bring the airplane back in one piece. Approach and landing felt almost routine now, which scared me a little. Complacency kills as effectively as any infection. I forced myself to respect the short strip, flared a touch high, corrected, and let the main settle with a firm but controlled chirp. We rolled out, taxied back to the hangar, and shut down. Back in the tower, we went over our impressions while they were still fresh, marking locations on the map with a pencil, adding notes in the margin. The hospital roof at University City looked quiet. No movement we could see from the air. The helipad was empty. The area around the river where we'd worked with Lena showed no obvious signs of trouble. No smoke, no large groups of infected near the banks. The highways leading out of the city remained clogged in several places. That made certain evacuation routes we might have fantasized about even less realistic. We also saw something we hadn't seen from the ground, a cluster of moving vehicles near the port of Wilmington. Not many. 2, maybe 3 trucks in a yard near one of the smaller terminals, leaving faint dust trails in the sunlight. Could have been survivors. Could have been people we didn't want to meet. Could have been an organized group who had figured out how to use the port's infrastructure to their advantage. "You think that's where the voice on the radio came from?" NOAA asked, pointing at the pencil circle we'd drawn around the area. "Maybe," I said. "Could be a separate group. Could be the same people who sent that half-broken transmission about Dock 6 and Rising. Hard to say." He leaned back. "Either way, there are people down there who still have vehicles that move, and enough fuel to run them in broad daylight. And enough confidence to do it, I said. Or enough desperation. We stared at the map for a while, letting the implications settle. The helicopter, the barge, the hospital, now this possible port group. The world was starting to show us pieces of itself again, not just as a background of risk, but as a set of nodes, places where people still moved and made decisions. The question wasn't whether we would intersect with them. It was when and how, and whether that intersection would help or hurt. That afternoon, when we made our usual call on guard at 1800, the frequency gave us something new. Philadelphia Tower, this is 7 Whiskey Mike, the helicopter pilot's voice came. We are 40 miles south along the river, inbound to your area with 1 patient and medical supplies. Request advisory on winds and recommended approach. We will not land unless pad is clear and secure. I straightened in the chair. The helicopter had never called us like that before. They'd always kept their distance, more interested in staying moving than in coordinating. 7 Whiskey Mike, Philadelphia Tower, I replied, keeping my tone professional. Surface winds calm to light from the southwest. Recommend approach along the river corridor east of the field, then turn westbound for straight into the hospital helipad at University City. We can have eyes on the pad. Advise souls on board and fuel remaining. 2 crew, 1 patient, the pilot said. Fuel, 1 hour, copy your recommendation. Request your assistance confirming pad is clear of obstacles and loose debris. We have no ground contact at the hospital. Understood, I said. Be advised we have previously coordinated with staff on that roof. Last known condition was clear pad and limited generator power. We will move to visual and call the pad status for you. Stand by. I cut transmission and looked at Noah. Truck, he said, already on his feet. We moved fast but not sloppy. Gear choice was simple this time. Radios, the Ruger, a couple of flares, minimal medical supplies in case the hospital staff had leaned hard on their last stock. We didn't need to carry a stretcher or oxygen. The helicopter had those. The route to University City was familiar now. We made it in good time, eyes always scanning alleys and cross streets. The hospital still had the same quiet air, no fresh graffiti, no new barricades. That was either good or very bad. There's no middle. The stairwell to the roof had collected a little more dust and debris, but nothing we couldn't move aside. We stepped onto the helipad with enough time to catch the first sight of the helicopter approaching along the river, nose slightly down, skids level. 7 Whiskey Mike Tower, I called. Pad is clear, winds calm at surface. Recommend approach from south. No loose debris observed. Antenna hazard northeast corner as previously reported. Copy all, the pilot said. 1 approach, no hover if unstable. We stepped back to the edge, well outside the paint, and braced against the expected downwash. The helicopter came in a little higher than the last time we'd watched it, then settled down with precision. The crew chief stepped out, crouched, and guided the stretcher from the cabin to the pad. The patient was awake but clearly weak, face pale, oxygen mask in place. The nurse we'd met before emerged from the stairwell, accompanied by a second staff member in scrubs. Their uniforms were more faded now, their faces were thinner, but they were still here. The handoff took less than 20 seconds. The crew chief returned to the cabin, door slid shut, and the helicopter lifted away, banking south again. Busy day? I asked the nurse over the fading rotor noise. You have no idea, she said, voice tired but with a hint of wry humor. Thank you for the advisory. Their pilot said he wouldn't have attempted this without someone on the ground. That's what we're here for, I said. She studied me for a second. You're the one in the tower. One of two now, I said. My friend Noah is back at the airport. She nodded once. We've managed to keep things contained up here. Floors below are another story. We've sealed where we can. Oxygen is our limiting factor. If your helicopter friends keep bringing it, we'll keep using it. We're trying to build a picture of who's doing what along the river and at the ports, I said. If you hear anything on your radios that sounds like a port call or a ship ID, note it. Time, words, anything. Use guard at 1800 to pass it. She gave a small, humorless laugh. I'll add that to my list, right between keep people breathing and make sure our generator doesn't set itself on fire. Fair, I said. We'll take whatever you can manage. On the way back to the truck, Noah was quiet until we reached the ground floor. That helicopter is running tighter margins than I'd like, he said finally. 1 hour of fuel on arrival, landing on a roof with no confirmed ground clearance, no hoist. Whoever's flying that has either a lot of confidence or no choice. Maybe both, I said. Back at the tower, when we logged the interaction, we added a column to the notebook we hadn't had before. Mutual aid. It felt a little grand for what we were doing. A couple of people with radios and a small airplane. But it was accurate. The pattern was there. We helped Lena with the barge. She became a potential transport node along the river. We helped the hospital with rooftop coordination. They became a source of medical information and maybe supplies. We kept the tower alive, and it became a coordination point for anyone flying within radio range. Later that evening, while we were checking the solar charge controllers and adjusting the battery connections for more efficient cycling, the radio gave us another surprise. This time, it wasn't on guard. It was on our old approach frequency. Philadelphia approach, Wilmington Harbor, a voice said, crackling and distorted but recognizable. If anyone is monitoring, we are looking to establish communications regarding river traffic and air assets. Please respond. I looked at Noah. He looked at me. We both leaned in. Wilmington Harbor, this is Philadelphia Tower, I replied, choosing to use tower instead of approach because in practice that's what we were. We are monitoring unlimited power. State your situation. There was a pause. I heard background noise on the other end. Distant voices. A generator, maybe a diesel engine at idle. Tower, harbor, the caller said. We have a small group operating a section of the port here. We've got a few trucks, a functioning crane, and access to some of the fuel stored on site. We've been seeing low-level aircraft and a helicopter along the river, and we'd rather coordinate than collide. We're also trying to keep the river from turning into a free-for-all. Understood, I said. We've had intermittent contact with a light helicopter, call sign 7 Whiskey Mike, operating along the river corridor. We've also been working with a small work barge captained by a woman named Lena. Your position would put you downstream from both. Copy that, Harbor said. We've seen the helicopter. We figured anybody still flying one of those with that kind of discipline had to be talking to someone. We're doing what we can, I said. Our capabilities are limited. Visual observation from the tower, 1 small fixed wing and 1 ground vehicle. But we have line of sight on the river near the airport and some of the highways. We can provide advisories if your people are within range. That's more than we've had, the harbor voice said. Look, I don't know if this is something you're interested in, but we've been working out how to move small groups by water and shoreside trucks. If you've got people who can find safe routes inland, and we've got fuel and a couple of hulls that can still float, there's no reason we can't help each other. I thought of the jammed highways, the way cars had gridlocked until they might as well be concrete barriers. I thought of the barge with its crane and Lena's practiced hands. I thought of the helicopter, the hospital, the tower, all of us improvising our own small islands. Short answer, I said, yes, we're interested, but we're not committing to anything beyond information until we know more about you and you know more about us." "Fair," Harbor said. "We're not asking for trust on the first call, just communication. Our working channel is 122.9. We'll monitor guard at midday and at 1800. Name here is Marcus." "Copy, Marcus," I said. "Evan at Philadelphia Tower. I've also got Noah with me. We'll log your channel and times. For now, be advised that any significant engine noise along the river tends to attract attention. Keep your runs short and your profiles low if you can." He gave a dry chuckle. "We've noticed. Harbor out." The carrier dropped. Noah sat back and rubbed his eyes. "We're really doing this, huh?" "Doing what?" I asked. "Building a network," he said. "Tower, helicopter, barge, hospital, port. It's like we're rebuilding a tiny version of what used to exist with duct tape and hope." "And checklists," I said. "Don't forget checklists." He snorted, and for a second the weight in the room lightened. The next few days blurred, but not in the way the early weeks of the outbreak had. This blur was the result of actual activity, not panic. Each morning, we started with the basics: water level in the roof tanks, solar output, battery state, freezer temperature, generator fuel. Then we scanned the field and the city, logging anything unusual. On most days, unusual was just a new patch of smoke in the distance where something had finally burned itself out, or a group of infected that had drifted from one corner of the airport to another. We heard 7 Whiskey Mike twice more, each time coordinating a rooftop landing at the hospital with our advisories. We began to settle into a pattern of short exchanges. 7 Whiskey Mike, Tower. Pad clear, winds calm, obstacles unchanged. Copy, Tower. 1 landing, 1 departure, minimal ground time. Thanks for the eyes. It was strange to feel useful just by looking and talking, but that was part of what I'd trained for before all this. Air traffic control had never been about physically touching airplanes. It had always been about using information and voice to keep people from running into each other. Lena checked in from the barge every couple of days. Sometimes she was at anchor behind a small island. Sometimes she was tied up at a private dock, trading filtered water and light repairs for food or information with the few family homes that still had people in them. Her updates were blunt and practical. "Current runs," she said in one call, "are mostly small, people moving from one side of a bend to another to get closer to their relatives' houses. I've seen 1 or 2 bigger groups trying to push boats out into the channel, but most of them don't understand the current or how to read the river. I'm staying clear unless they flag me down and look like they're not idiots." We respected that. The last thing we needed was to encourage anyone to treat the river like a highway without respecting that it could kill you quickly if you didn't understand it. Marcus at Wilmington Harbor checked in on schedule too. His information was more structured. You could tell he had some kind of formal background. Coast Guard, Port Authority, maybe just a long time working around ships. "We've secured a segment of the yard," he said on one call. "About 4 acres fenced with 1 working fuel depot and 2 forklifts that still behave. We've got a small troop of volunteers clearing containers and stacking them to make better walls. We have eyes on the main river and one of the inlets. If your barge people want to tie up here at some point, we can offer them a safe berth and maybe trade." "I'll pass that along to Lena," I said. "No promises. She's got her own judgment to make." "That's all we can ask," he said. Internally, in the tower, we built our own little set of rules about this growing web of contacts. Rule 1. Never give away exact positions of our safe points unless absolutely necessary. General descriptions were fine. Coordinates were not. Rule 2. Trade information first, resources second, people last. Moving people had the highest risk and the most potential for unintended consequences. Rule 3. Assume that any transmission could be overheard by someone we didn't know existed. A third rule became important faster than we expected. It happened on a day when the weather was overcast and flat, the sort of gray lid that makes sound feel closer. We had done our morning checks and were in the middle of planning a modest Cherokee run. Just a quick loop to verify a rumor Lena had shared about a small survivor cluster near a former public works yard when the radio popped alive with a new voice on guard. Any station, this is Riverside Community. The rest of the words dissolved into static. I keyed up. Riverside Community, this is Philadelphia Tower. Say again your call sign and location. There was a rush of noise then. Group near the river. Old water treatment plant. We hear traffic on guard, and we're trying to reach anyone who's not hostile. Understood, I said. We have multiple friendly contacts along the river corridor and at the harbor. We also have no control over who else might be listening. Use caution. What do you need? A different voice came on the same frequency, younger maybe. We've been holding out with a handful of people, maybe a dozen, at the treatment facility near Eddystone. We've got walls, water, some food, but we're starting to run low on certain supplies. Medical, mostly. We've seen a helicopter, we've seen a barge. We're trying to figure out if there's an actual network out there or just random sightings. There's something between those two, I said. We're in touch with a helicopter crew and a barge captain. We're also speaking with the port at Wilmington. I can't promise anything, but I can pass your position along and see if there are any safe ways to cooperate. Anything is better than nothing, the younger voice said. We've had a couple of bad encounters with groups from inland who are less interested in trading and more interested in taking. That word hung in the air. Understood, I said. For now, keep your transmissions short. Use guard at agreed-upon times. We'll label you Riverside in our log if that's acceptable. That's fine, they said. Riverside it is. After we signed off, I turned to Noah. That's 4, I said. Helicopter, barge, hospital, harbor, and now Riverside. 5 if you count us. Plus any groups we don't know about yet, he added. And at least one set of hostiles inland, probably more than one. Probability of someone listening to these conversations and not announcing themselves? I asked. High, he said. Maybe very high. We started logging, not just who we talked to, but also the times when frequencies we monitored were active, but no one responded to our calls. Those empty carriers told their own story. In between these calls and flights and planning sessions, life in the tower still revolved around more mundane tasks. Fixing the handle on the break room cabinet, replacing a failed LED in one of the desk lamps, cleaning the dust filters on the small fans we used to move air when we couldn't open windows. You don't get to ignore the small chores in favor of the big missions. If you do, the small things pile up until they become their own crisis. One evening, just after sunset, I was on the roof checking the catchment system when I saw something that made my stomach clench. From the tower roof, you can see a long way. It's one of the reasons I stayed here in the first place, but that also means you see things developing before they arrive. On the far side of the airport, near one of the long-term parking lots, a slow-moving line of figures was making its way across the open ground. At first, I thought it was just another group of infected drifting in the general direction of noise they'd heard days ago. That was common. They have patterns and currents of their own. But as I watched, it became clear that this was different. The line was long, dozens at least, maybe more. They moved in a rough formation, not tight but consistent, angled toward the fence line near one of the main access roads. And they were moving faster than a casual drift. Not sprinting, but with purpose, as much as anything like them can have purpose. I called down to Noah. "Got movement," I said, keeping my voice level. "Northwest side, near long-term parking. Big group." He was up the stairs in under a minute, binoculars around his neck. We watched together. "That's a lot," he said quietly. "At least 50, maybe more in the back." The group reached the fence and began pressing against it. The chain link flexed, bowed, then slowly started to lean inward under the weight. The posts held at first. The infected didn't seem to care about the minor shocks from the still connected but long-dead security wiring. They kept pushing. Eventually, there was a metallic groan as one of the corner posts finally surrendered to rust and physics. The fence came down in a slow wave like a curtain collapsing. The group spilled through onto the airport side. They didn't move directly toward the tower. That would have been a bigger problem. Instead, they funneled onto one of the roads leading deeper into the airport grounds, drawn by something we couldn't see or hear from where we stood. "Where are they headed?" Noah asked. I tracked their route with my finger on the glass. "If they keep this line, they'll pass near the cargo terminal and the maintenance yards. If they angle east, they might get near the ARFF station. If they go south, they could find the hangars. The Cherokee. If they get drawn by something near the maintenance area," I said, more to myself than to him, "there's a chance they could wander close to the hangar we're using for the airplane. Doors are closed, but sound echoes." Noah followed my gaze. "We need to know if anything is making noise down there," he said. "Loose metal panel, wind through a duct, anything that could be drawing them." "We can't go out now," I said. "Not with that many between us and the hangar. We'd be walking into a funnel." "I know," he said. "I'm not suggesting we move now. I'm just thinking about what happens if they decide to stay and spread out." We watched as the group continued its slow, unsettling march across the grounds. A few broke off from the main mass, wandering toward parked vehicles or shadowed corners. Most stayed with the flow, following whatever intangible trail they were following. It took them nearly an hour to fully clear the area near the broken fence. By then, night had fallen, and their silhouettes blended into the darkness. We stayed up later than usual that night, rotating turns at the glass, radios turned low. The infected do not move like animals hunting. They just move. But the effect is the same if you're in their path. The next morning, we did something that felt counterintuitive. We did not immediately rush down to fix anything. Instead, we did a slow, careful set of observations from the tower, using every optical tool we had. Binoculars, the old spotting scope from the ATS room, naked eyes against the glass, tracking tiny motions. The group that had broken the fence had spread out across a wide area of the airport. Some had drifted toward the cargo loading zones and were now clustered around empty trailers and loading dock doors. A smaller portion had gravitated toward a line of maintenance sheds. A few had, thankfully, continued past the hangars and moved toward the open runways, where they were now wandering in the middle of the concrete. It told us something important. There was no single, strong noise source drawing them toward our most valuable assets. It also told us that the broken fence would now become a regular entry point for any other groups that wandered through that area. We added that location to our internal map in bright red and started talking about what it would take to secure it, or at least control it. "We don't have enough material to rebuild the whole fence," Noah said realistically. "And even if we did, we don't have the manpower to keep them from doing this again if a big group leans on it." "Agreed," I said. "So instead, we treat that gap like a gate. We don't try to close it. We try to channel anything that comes through in directions that work better for us. Like low points in a levee," he said. "Let the water choose the path you can predict." Exactly. We spent the next 3 days working on something that would have looked utterly strange to anyone from the old world. partially blocking some paths and deliberately leaving others more open, so that movement across a wide area would funnel in the direction we chose. We used abandoned baggage carts, sections of portable chain-link barricades, empty cargo pallets, whatever we could drag into position with the truck or by hand. From above, the pattern looked like a series of subtle guide rails that would gently nudge anything moving from the broken fence area toward the open runway spaces and away from the hangar line and the base of the tower. We did nothing that would obviously look like a wall. Anything too solid or striking would invite testing. We made it look accidental, random arrangements of debris that, from our height, created a clear flow. It was slow, tiring work. We could only move so much in a day without making more noise than we were comfortable with. We did it during daylight hours when we could see everything. We stayed in constant radio contact between the ground and the tower, one of us always up high while the other moved pieces below. By the end of the third day, the area near the broken fence looked like a scattered junkyard. To anyone wandering through on foot, infected or otherwise, it would just look like the usual chaos of an abandoned airport. To us, it was a subtle defensive system. The first time a new group of infected stumbled through that gap and drifted along our constructed path toward the open runway, it felt like watching a flowchart work. "They're following the line," Noah said from the tower. "Good," I said, from the truck, parked at a safe distance. "Let them keep going." They did, and as they spread out across the vast concrete expanse, their density dropped, and their threat became less concentrated. We ticked that off in the notebook as successful passive deflection. We also underlined it and circled it, because it gave us something we hadn't had much of until now. A feeling that we were shaping our environment instead of simply reacting to it. Life in the tower continued like that for a while. Small operations, incremental improvements, cautious outreach to our growing network. Then came the firefight. To be clear, we weren't in it. We were high above it, but that didn't make it any less real. It started with a sound we hadn't heard in weeks. Rapid, repeated bangs echoing off the river and up through the open sky. Not single shots. Not the occasional panicked discharge you sometimes hear when someone inexperienced gets spooked. This was sustained, controlled, and organized. We were at the glass within seconds, scanning the river corridor with binoculars. The sound came from south of the airport, near one of the industrial zones along the riverbank. I swept the area, eyes jumping from dock to dock. "Got it," Noah said first. "South-southeast, near the old tank farm." I followed his pointing hand. At first, I saw only the tanks and the skeletal outlines of loading arms. Then, near a low pier, I saw two small shapes that didn't match the environment. Vehicles. One was a pickup truck backed toward the water's edge, doors open, bed loaded with what looked like drums or crates. The other was a smaller SUV, angled across the access road as if it had been hastily parked or used as a barricade. Between them, maybe half a dozen figures took cover behind their vehicles and the low concrete barriers, occasionally leaning out to fire toward what I initially thought was a group of infected near the far perimeter fence. Then I saw the muzzle flashes coming back from the fence line. "That's not infected," I said, stomach tightening. "That's a gunfight." We watched, careful to stay low behind the tarps, not because anyone down there could see us at this distance, but because years of training and survival instinct told us to reduce our profile when observing someone with weapons. It was hard to make out details at that range, but it looked as if one group had been trying to load or unload something at the dock when another group had approached from inland and attempted to take it from them. The exchange of fire was sporadic but not wild. Both sides knew what they were doing. "Think that's Wilmington Harbor?" Noah asked, still tracking the scene. Too far north, I said. Could be some of their people. Could be a completely separate group using the facilities up here. Either way, that's the first time we've seen two groups of armed survivors openly going at it in our visual range, he said. Yeah, I said. And if we can see them, the helicopter might too. So might Lena. So might Riverside. We didn't transmit anything at first. The firefight lasted only a few minutes more, then tapered off. One of the vehicles at the dock ignited, sending a plume of smoke into the air that would take hours to fully dissipate. A few figures moved away from the scene on foot. Hard to tell who they belonged to. When it was quiet again, we called Marcus at Harbor on our agreed channel. Harbor Tower, you on? Go ahead, Tower. Marcus responded almost immediately. We're listening. About 30 minutes ago, we observed a firefight near the tank farm north of us, I said, giving the approximate position. 2 vehicles, multiple armed individuals, exchange of gunfire. 1 vehicle burned. Unknown casualties. No movement there now. Any of yours involved? Silence for a second. Then, no. We haven't sent anyone that far up today. We've heard rumors of a group operating out of one of the smaller terminals up near Eddystone, using trucks to raid further upriver. Could be them. Could be someone they tangled with. We're informing you and Lena and Riverside, I said. Treat that area as contested ground. Unknown hostiles. We don't recommend running any boats in that stretch unless you have to. Copy, he said. Appreciate the heads up. We'll adjust our patterns. We passed the same information to Lena on her next check-in, and to Riverside when we could reach them. That was the first time I really felt the weight of what we were doing from this tower. We weren't just surviving, we were influencing where and how other people moved. If we were wrong about a hazard, if we under or overestimated a threat, people could get hurt. It was one thing to talk a lone pilot into a safe landing. It was another to effectively draw lines on a mental map that told other survivors where not to go. That night, I sat at the supervisor's desk long after Noah had gone to lie down, staring at the map with its growing number of annotations. The red circles for hostiles, the blue circles for allies, the black lines for known safe routes, the dotted lines for probably okay if you're careful. From up here, the city looked almost manageable. On paper, the network of contacts looked almost organized. But all it would take was one bad call, one outbreak in the wrong place, one group making different choices, to collapse a whole section of our little improvised system. I thought about the C-130 again, the last formal evacuation I had facilitated from this airport. I thought about the smoke column I'd seen later, and what that had done to any illusion I'd had about official rescue. Then I thought about the Cherokee, the barge, the helicopter, the hospital, the port, Riverside, the tower. Unofficial, unsanctioned, uncoordinated by anyone except the people on the ground and in the air. If there was going to be any kind of future in this corner of the world, it wasn't going to come from a uniformed airlift. It was going to come from people like us, understaffed, under-equipped, stubborn enough to stick around, organized enough to not get themselves killed immediately. The next chapter in that developing story came, as many things did, over the radio. 2 days after the tank farm firefight, during our midday guard window, a new voice came on. Male, mid-30s maybe, with the clipped, precise tone of someone used to talking on a microphone. Philadelphia Tower, this is 7 Whiskey Mike, he said. We've been asked to relay a message from a group near the river. They say they've been listening to your calls and the harbor calls. They're interested in joining the party, as they put it. They don't want to talk directly yet. They want to feel you out through us. Understood, 7 Whiskey Mike, I said. What can you tell us about them? Not much, he said. They're inland from the river a bit, near an old distribution center. About 20 people, mixed skills. They've been watching the roads and taking what they can from abandoned trucks. They say they've had a couple of run-ins with the people up near the tank farm, and it didn't go well. They're worried that if they don't connect to some kind of larger group, they'll be picked off. I thought about the firefight, the burned truck, the stories from Riverside of hostile inland groups. What do they call themselves? I asked. They're using the name yard, he said, as in the yard where the distribution center is. Copy that, I said. You can tell them this from us. We're interested in talking to anyone who's not actively trying to hurt others. But we don't mediate disputes. We can share information and advisories. We can't promise rescue or resources. If they want to talk, they can pick a frequency and a time, and we'll listen. I'll relay that, he said. They've also asked if you have any information on a possible larger flight coming up from the south. They say they picked up some distant chatter a few nights ago about a convoy in the air and multiple transports. I felt a chill, even though the room temperature hadn't changed. Multiple transports. Convoy in the air. After months of a mostly empty sky, that phrase landed heavier than any individual helicopter flight. Negative, I said. We have no confirmed information about any scheduled or ongoing air convoys. We've only seen your helicopter in a couple of small general aviation flights in the last weeks. Can you get any more detail from them? I can try, he said. All they had were fragments. They thought it might be recorded chatter from before everything went bad. Could also be someone reusing old radio traffic on a loop to attract attention. Bait, I said. Possibly, he agreed. We signed off, and I looked at Noah. If someone out there is replaying old radio traffic about convoys to lure people in, that's a different kind of threat, I said. Yeah, he said grimly. That's not just scavenging. That's strategy. We started another column in the notebook that day. Information warfare. It sounded dramatic, but it fit. The idea that someone would fake radio calls to draw survivors into ambushes or resource traps made my skin crawl. It weaponized the very thing we'd been relying on to build connections. Trust in voices over the air. From then on, we took any new too-good-to-be-true transmissions with an extra heavy dose of suspicion. Offers of safe zones, with plentiful food and security, broadcast on open frequencies. We logged them and flagged them as likely bait unless corroborated by someone we knew in person. We also started asking more specific questions when people called in. Details that someone replaying an old message might not know how to answer. Time of day, weather, terrain features. You can fake a lot over the radio. It's harder to fake a coherent description of what you're seeing right now if you're just hitting play on something pre-recorded. All of this, the flights, the fence breaking, the firefight, the growing network, the potential bait, had a cumulative effect on the tower. It went from being just my personal survival bunker to something like a tiny operations center. We reorganized the space to reflect that. One wall became the map wall, with printed sectional charts and street maps taped up, covered in notes, pins, and string. Another section of the room became the radio console area, where we consolidated the working VHF sets, the handheld chargers, and the improvised antenna patch panel we'd rigged from salvaged parts in the ILS shack. The supervisor's desk became the information hub, not just for logs, but for our running assessment of who we trusted, how much, and why. And then there was the corner we both tried not to think about too much, the evacuation options board. It had been blank for a long time. Not because we hadn't thought about leaving, but because there hadn't been any realistic way to do it that didn't feel like suicide. Now, there were at least 3 theoretical options. each with its own set of risks and requirements. Option 1. The Cherokee. Limited range, limited payload, but capable of getting 2 to 3 people and some gear to another airfield, assuming we could find one that was not overrun, had fuel, and was near a viable long-term location. Option 2. The barge, via Lena. Slow, vulnerable to river conditions and potential hostiles, but able to carry heavier loads and more people if properly organized. Option 3. Some kind of combined operation involving the port at Wilmington and whatever larger vessels they might have access to. None of those options were imminent. We weren't ready to make that decision yet, but having them on the board, even in rough outline, changed how the tower felt. Before, this had been the only place. Now, it was the primary place. There's a difference. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the city and the sky turned that flat orange-gray that seems unique to places with a lot of concrete, I stood at the glass and watched the runway center lines fade into the dimness. I thought about day 1, when the first flights diverted away from here because of the outbreak reports. I thought about day 10, when the last commercial aircraft departed. Day 24, when the last medevac helicopter left for a hospital that would later call for help. Day 49, when the last C-130 climbed into the night carrying people who thought they were going to safety and never reached it. Now, we were well into the triple digits of days since the world cracked. I had stopped counting them individually because they had blurred into routines and checklists and minor dramas, but they still mattered. There are no guarantees in this world now. No one is coming with a big, organized rescue fleet to sweep us out of here. If we leave, it will be because we decide to, with the tools and allies we've gathered. If we stay, it will be because this place remains the best option. Looking down at the runways, at the cracked asphalt and the wandering shapes of the infected in the distance, I still felt something that surprised me. Not hope exactly, but a kind of cautious, stubborn commitment. As long as this tower stood, as long as the radios worked, as long as we could see and talk, we had a role to play. For ourselves, for Lena and Piper, for Marcus at the harbor, for the nurses on the roof, for Riverside, for the helicopter crew, even possibly for groups like Yard, still deciding whether they wanted to be part of something more than themselves. My name is Evan McCready. I was a junior air traffic controller. Now I am something else. A survivor, a watcher, a reluctant coordinator of a small, fragile network stretched along a river and a city. The world below us may never be what it was, but up here, 200 feet above a sea of concrete, steel, and slow-moving danger, we're learning how to do something new. We're learning how to keep people from colliding into each other in a world where everything else already has. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.